So, first of all, I'm going to ruin your equipment. And second, thank you again for the invitation to give a talk here. That's an issue that's close to my heart, and it's even better to discuss it with people who've written, who've had a look at what I'm going to say there and criticized it, added something to it. So this is, I think, a very valuable thing here for me. So thank you all for attending. And thank you for the invitation and setting this up, Michal. I really appreciate this. I think there are quite some differences in our view on the neural correlate of consciousness. But I think that I take this to be more of a clarificatory talk. So I think a lot of what I'm trying to say is try to give you the reasons and constraints that I pose myself when I'm talking about the neural correlate of consciousness and when I'm talking about what's the right idea to have of a neural correlate of consciousness. Because I think we have a lot of constraints in common, right? So you are open with your favoring identity theory. I guess I'm a closet identity theorist. So there's not a lot of difference. We also emphasize the importance of typing, of creating types on the phenomenal and neurological side. So I think there we have a similar view. So it must be somewhere in the details where we differ. And I try to work out and then try to criticize a little bit what I think is criticizable in your view, and I think it clarifies a lot the issue where we differ, and I think we can better get to the details of the thing. So what I'm trying to give you now is a rough view of what I think consciousness studies, and specifically the neuroscience of consciousness, is about, and very specifically what this kind of notion of a neural correlate of consciousness is about. Because this seems to be at the core of what neuroscientists interested in phenomenal consciousness are studying, right? They are searching, that's an avowal of them, they try to search for the neural correlate of consciousness. So I think what we should stress is that's not a normal language term, right? It's not a natural language term, right? It's an invented term. So there's no kind of preconceived or folk theoretical understanding of what a neural correlate of consciousness is, right? So what we have to do instead is more a kind of conceptual engineering. We have to think of what are constraints that we want a notion of a neural correlate of consciousness to fulfill, and then see how we should clarify this concept such that it fulfills these constraints or these kind of desiderata. So this is what I'm going to focus on. I should also say that even though Crick and Chalmers are the two people who are most commonly associated with this notion of a neural correlate, that the history goes back way before. So the earliest mention of a neural correlate or a neurophysiological correlate or a neurological correlate of consciousness I got is from late in the 19th century by Ladd, 1895. Ward, 1911, is really interesting because it's an Encyclopedia Britannica article where he's mentioning the neural correlate of consciousness in the context of epiphenomenalism and even in the concept of things like pre-stabilized harmony. Leibnizian ideas of dualism. So there's a lot of interesting ways in which the neural correlate of consciousness has been used before. But Crick was the first to really bring it to the forefront and make it such an important concept for this kind of dawning neuroscience of consciousness. And Chalmers was the first to make the standard definition that everybody accepts. So there are a few things that we should probably get clear also when we're talking about consciousness or about the neural correlate, and that's what I think would be adequacy conditions for a good type of, well, let's call it definition. I sometimes call it operationalization, I sometimes call it definition, sometimes elucidation. Let's call it definition, let's stick with this for the time being. So what would be good adequacy conditions for a definition of a neural correlate of consciousness? I'm going to talk now about NCC, just because it's quicker. Yeah, that's fine. I got a black slide where I want you to focus on me, not on that. So I just use it as a trick so I can, guide your attention where the fun stuff is happening. So here are the four kind of big NCC definitions that are on the market. They're all on your handout on that kind of second slide. The first mention of Crick of the neural correlate of consciousness, where he's actually talking a little bit about the structure, was in The Astonishing Hypothesis in 1995. And there he just mentions that he wants to search for neural correlates of consciousness, but he doesn't really give a big definition. But there's this one line where he talks a little bit about the logical structure, how he thinks neural correlates, or the neural stuff, somehow attaches to the conscious stuff. And it's this: we may be able to say that you perceive red if and only if certain neurons and or molecules in your head behave in a certain way. So it's supposed to be an if and only if, so it's an equivalence, right? Whenever that is, then you're conscious, and whenever you're conscious, then this happens in your brain, right? Chalmers deviates from this in his 2000 paper, What is a Neural Correlate of Consciousness? He writes, a neural correlate is a minimal neural state, n, such that there is a mapping from states of n to states of consciousness, where a given state of n is sufficient under condition C for the corresponding state of consciousness. I will also have this shortly on the presentation, so if you don't have a handout, it's all fine. I'm just going to read these ones. Now, what differentiates Chalmers' take from Crick's take is that he loosens up this way of if and only if, right? He thinks the neural stuff is only sufficient for consciousness, right? That means that other things can bring about consciousness as well, right? But a neural correlate is just a sufficient condition for consciousness to arise. And then there's this weird phrase of a mapping, which I think needs a little bit of clarification. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Now comes my definition from the 2016 paper, A Deeper Look at the Neural Correlate of Consciousness. And I say that a neural correlate, I call it NCC 2.0 because I think it should be like a totally different thing from the Chalmers thingy. An NCC 2.0 of a phenomenal type P is a type of neural event or process. So I'm already talking more openly about a type-type matching between correlates. So the correlates should be types. What correlates with what should be types. A type of neural event or process ends such that there's a mapping where each neural token of this type is minimally sufficient for a phenomenal token of that phenomenal type, and where all and only neural tokens of n instantiate a feature bundle such that that feature bundle is a natural, necessary condition for being a neural correlate. So this I'm going to unpack a little bit. Now, the next big step forward was Poláek and Marvan's paper from 2018, The Neural Correlates Meets the Identity Theory. And they think that their add-on is only slightly, because they call it 2.1. I think it could be 3.0, but it's fine. So an NCC 2.1, a phenomenal type, is a type of neural events. There they are all similar with me. They also think that neural tokens are minimally sufficient for phenomenal tokens. There they are the same, or similar to my definition. But they differentiate in the second clause, where all and only neural tokens of n instantiate a neural mechanism M such that M is a sufficient condition for being an NCC. So they loosen up this kind of idea of of this feature bundle being a necessary condition. They think it should be just sufficient. And they interpret feature bundle as being a neural mechanism. Now I have to clarify that they also write this, that according, secondly, the neural feature bundle, according to Fink, is a general mechanism of consciousness. I never use the word mechanism. So, and I think it's an interesting point because I definitely didn't try to use the word because it's so associated with mechanistic explanations and the whole kind of mechanism debate in the philosophy of mind. But I think that you and I have a very similar understanding of mechanisms. If I read later in your paper, you're talking more about what you think about mechanisms, that you also distance yourself from, you do not think it should be one-to-one to this kind of mechanistic explanation kind of thing that Mahama and Craver, for example, talk about. So I think this might be only a slight thing, but I think the interesting thing is this kind of deviation between your and my definition from necessary conditions to sufficient conditions. So now I'm going to talk about the adequacy conditions and explain a little bit why I think Chalmers is a big step forward from Crick, and Fink does a little bit of things better than Chalmers, and then see whether you do better than I do. Okay, so here are my adequacy conditions. They're very pragmatic. I think the difference is whether you want to have a metaphysical emphasis, tying the neural correlate to a certain type of metaphysical theory, which I think you're having a metaphysical emphasis in that paper, or whether you have a stronger emphasis on philosophy of science. So thinking about what is the methodology of this kind of science. And I think you have that too. So now I want to talk a bit about more these kind of adequacy conditions. I think the first is, why do we actually want to know NCCs at all, right? Why do we want to actually know this, right? So why should anybody spend money and spend time in a scanner that we could use to like diagnose brain cancers to find the neural correlate of consciousness, right? It's a good question, I think, because you also have to answer this, and give an answer to funding agencies, right? Because they have to pay you for that. So if you look at why people say that they are searching for neural correlates, there are two things that come up very often. The first is, it would be great because we actually care whether people are conscious or not, right? And it would be some kind of objective criterion to understand whether, for example, a comatose patient still has consciousness or not, or whether a certain animal still is able to feel pain, right? And therefore we have to treat it in a different way. Or whether we can probably build a robot that has kind of does the right stuff and then it could be conscious, right? So these are things that people are talking about. And that would mean searching for some kind of things that are sufficient for consciousness, because if you find them, you know that these kind of entities are conscious or not. Well, you know that they're conscious. The interesting thing is the or not part. What we also want is exclusion criteria. We want to also know when, for example, a comatose patient is not conscious, right? And we want to know which kind of animals out there are. We want to make sure that we know that some of these critters out there are not conscious, right? I mean, if you care about, for example, the well-being of cows, you probably might not care about the well-beings of cockroaches, for example. So there should be some way in which you can say, well, it's not only that we have this kind of nice indicator that's a sufficient condition for consciousness in cows, but that cockroach is missing that, and therefore that's not conscious, right? So we want these exclusion criteria as well. And I think that plays a very important role. So I'm stressing this. The second thing is a kind of just a fact. We know that our brains are having these massive types of redundancies. So if I shortly inhibit certain very minute parts of your brain, you probably would not really notice that much. individual cells are not so important for broad-scale cognition and probably not for broad-scale consciousness. If I would inhibit a single neuron in your visual cortex to not fire, probably you wouldn't notice this in experience. That doesn't mean that it doesn't do any work. It just means that the others can do the same work. And that's what we could call redundancy. There's another thing called plasticity. So, for example, that you're having a brain, and you're having a lesion. For a while, you probably will not have the right kind of consciousness, but it could be that your brain rewires itself such that another part of your brain can fulfill the same kind of role and bring about the same kind of experiences. A very drastic example is the first picture of your handout. I'm going to show you this. So this is kind of an illustration how you could think about kind of lesions, right? So let's say that this is a neural state that brings about experiences. You are having a stroke, right? So this thing is destroyed. But after a while, another area of that same neural system that had a stroke and part of it were destroyed can take over and bring about this kind of experience. And the very strong part I want to show you, maybe strong illustration would be this. This is from The Lancet in 2002, and that's the whole article. It's just this very telling picture. This is from a 7-year-old girl who had a hemispherectomy. So half of her brain was taken out with 3 years of age because of epilepsy. It happens from time to time. It's not too uncommon for this kind of drastic kind of surgery, but you usually only do this in small children because then they have this kind of strong capability of actually rewiring their brain. Now the interesting thing is that this girl shows nearly no defects with 7 years of age. So 4 years later, even though the left side of the brain was, so we're looking from the front, and this is, we're looking from the back, this is the, no wait. Anyway, so this is, the left part is missing. So the interesting thing is that usually you have very selective speech centers in that part of the brain, right? But she shows no defects about speech, right? She's bilingual, Turkish and Dutch, so she definitely has no real problems with understanding a language. She actually understands two. But the interesting thing is also that half of her sensory motor cortex is missing as well. So actually, if it's her left side, she should not be able to use the right side of her body, because this is the part that is sensed and directed by the left side of the brain. Now, she shows none of these signs. And I don't know if you've tickled a 3-year-old. They are ticklish. You can tickle them on both sides, which suggests that they have some kind of experience, probably, of their body on both sides, right? This girl shows also no problems with using both of her sides. Could you tickle her? If she's ticklish on both sides, wouldn't that probably be an idea that she does have a feeling of both sides of her body? If so, then having a left sensory cortex doesn't mean that it's the only way in which you can have feelings of the left side of your body. Some other parts of the brain can take over. This is just a very radical illustration, but I thought I'll go radical just to push the point home. So these kind of redundancy issues, where we know that different parts of the brain can bring about probably the same kind of experiences, is another adequacy condition. Now, another adequacy condition is, I think, intertheoretic competition. We should set up the NCC such that we can have two theories that ascribe differently consciousness under the same kind of circumstances, but not both of them can be right. So we want to have a kind of thing that we have with every other science, namely that if there are two theories about the same section of the world and they make different predictions, at least one of them has to be false. I think that's what we want. We want to have like a very normal thing that we have in every other science. So inter-theoretic competition should be something that we should strive for. And the last thing is, and I think this is the strongest adequacy condition that probably you might not share with me. And that's what I call metaphysical promiscuity. A lot of you probably know about monogamy. It's if a person only has one other person as their common sexual partner, that's usually a monogamy, right? And promiscuity would be if you're happy to, you know, sleep around, have other people that you're fine to pair up with. The same kind of thing happens with theories as well. There are certain type of theories that where you can just read off the metaphysics of them. You immediately know what kind of entities they think exist, how many kinds of entities there are, which ones are the properties, which ones are the substances, and so on and so on. There are other theories which do not directly give you one kind of metaphysics, but different type of metaphysics, physical theories might work with the same kind of empirically proven theory. That's what I would call metaphysical promiscuity. This type of theory does not force you to accept just this one type of metaphysics. And there might be some benefit to that for a neural correlate of consciousness definition, because if you've been around neuroscientists, some of them have hidden dualistic tendencies, but they still do good work for the neuroscience of consciousness, right? So, and another thing is that in the beginning, you just want to start with doing something empirical, right? And if we say, wait, neuroscientists, first the philosophers have to come to a conclusion and converge on one metaphysical theory, and then you can do your work, right? Probably you get a, yeah, sure. We want to do this in the next 300 years. That would be nice. And I mean, there's nearly no topic where actually philosophers truly converged on one kind of metaphysics. So I think if we stress too much that we want to have this type of metaphysics and we pre-built this into a neural correlate definition, we would have some kind of pragmatic ideas. We would lose certain scientists, we would alienate certain scientists, and we don't want this early on in a science. So I think that, I mean, metaphysical promiscuity is not metaphysical neutrality. It doesn't mean that you can exclude certain theories. That's fine, I think. But I think the more metaphysical theories you can capture, the more people you can bring into the boat and really work with you and on the empirical stuff. So I think that those are four interesting ideas. Let me stress one short thing as well. The problem sometimes is what kind of notion of correlation we're dealing with. You make a great point of stressing the difference between horizontal and vertical correlations. Horizontal correlations being asynchronous correlations. So if this event happens, something else happened before that, and something else will happen later on, right? So, for example, if a new government is being put into practice and being, sworn in, very likely before there was some kind of vote going on, at least in democracies like ours, right? And very probably there's a certain point where these people will not be in government anymore, right? So those are things that are asynchronously happening. I'm just want to say this, that under some conditions, this might be more valuable than synchronous correlation. For example, if you're an anesthesiologist, you would like to know beforehand if in a minute a patient will gain consciousness or not, because then you have a window of time to actually prevent that. Synchronous correlation wouldn't really be of interest to you in that context. But from a neuroscientific perspective, synchronous correlation is the thing that we're really interested in. So I'm going to focus on synchronous correlation. And I just want to give you this kind of one thing because I think it's really important. We often also think of positive correlations as being the only type of correlation. This is a very nice example. This shows you the red line is the divorce rate in Maine, and between 2000 and 2009, and the blue line is the per capita consumption of margarine in the US. And you see it's got a very nice correlation, right? But this is a positive correlation. If one goes up, the other goes down. This illustrates 2 points. First of all, correlations are cheap, right? They're everywhere. And you shouldn't expect too much from a correlation. For example, you shouldn't expect that there's a metaphysical connection between these two kind of things, right? So correlation can happen without there being any kind of interesting metaphysical thing going on. The other thing is, you shouldn't really necessarily expect an explanation, right, from knowing correlates. I mean, if you have a good explanation for that type of correlation, come and speak to me later on. But there's another interesting type of correlation that we sometimes have a bias against in NCC talk, and that's negative correlation. So the red line here is the honey-producing bee colonies in the US, and the blue line is the juvenile arrests for possessions of marijuana, right? And this has a really, really high correlation coefficient, higher than we ever have in NCC theories, right? I'm just showing you that might also be an interesting correlation to look at, not just which things in the brain are active, but which ones are inactive, probably, when you are conscious. And a side note, this is specifically interested if you're thinking that there should be informational correlates, because a 0 just has as much informational value as a 1 does, right? So sometimes inactivities in information theories are very telling and very interesting. So, but we are probably having this bias towards activation, and that's fine. But maybe we shouldn't put this, put this kind of bias into our NCC definitions. So let's go through these definitions and see how they fare. So the first is the Crick one. We may be able, I go to this one, the first one. We may be able to say that your perceived red if and only if certain neurons in your head behave in a certain way. So whenever you're having a feeling of red, there's a specific type of neural stuff happening in your brain. That sounds like whenever you're having a feeling of your left side, your left body, there's a very specific type of activation happening at the right side of your brain. So I think that's not very good, right? So it doesn't apparently really clarify the redundancy issue. It is also not really metaphysically promiscuous, right? Because it would suggest that there cannot be any type of multiple realizability. So functionalism, the idea that, well, you can have something happening in a brain and something happening in a computer, for example, in a silicon chip, and they both bring about the same kind of experiences. That's impossible with that definition, because it's an if and only if thing. If you're conscious, that thing has to happen in your brain. So I think there are two kind of these adequacy constraints that we can put forward and reject Crick therefore. Yeah? Now, Chalmers. An NCC is a minimal neural system such that there is a mapping from states of N to states of consciousness where a given state of N is sufficient under condition C for the corresponding state of consciousness. Now, Chalmers really stresses the redundancy thing. And I think that's a good way to do this, because if there is redundancy, so if two neural activations in your brain can bring about the same kind of experience, that would mean that each is not necessary. They're just sufficient, right? Each is sufficient to bring about this type of experience. But let's talk a little bit about the mapping stuff, because that is, that might be a little bit still questionable. But Chalmers is a mathematician, so he thinks about, I think that he thinks about mapping in a mathematical way. And there, mapping is not something very special. It just means that you have two types of domains, and somehow these two types of domains are somewhat, in an interesting way, connected. So he says it's a mapping. So these are my two domains. This is the domain. And actually, this would be called the codomain. And he says it's a mapping of states of neural states to states of phenomenal consciousness. So this would be my neural states, and these would be my phenomenal states, right? And so here, let's say we've got, this is a very simple system. It can only be conscious of four things, right? Red, green, pink, and pain. So now we have to think about it. So we have these kind of domains here, right? So there we got a few kind of neural things. And then the question is, how do they map? And there are four different ways in which you can think about mapping. The first is the very easy one. It's just projection. There are some ways that these things relate, but not everything in the domain has to map onto the codomain, and everything in the codomain has to map onto something in the domain. But that's, if you've got that kind of mapping, then just everything's possible, right? So there can be phenomenal states that are free-floating, that no neural stuff can bring about. But also two different types of neural states that can bring about the same type of experience. Projection is really loose. Maybe you want something stronger. I'm going to go with blue for the next one. You could go for injection. In injection, every type of neural state maps, and let's take this one out, maps onto exactly one of these type of states, but no two map to the same, right? So this, for example, would be a case of injection. So there's still one kind of phenomenal state here that is free-floating. There doesn't need to be anything kind of ghostly, right? You can't think, oh my God, this must be the soul part, right? No neural stuff can bring this about. But it doesn't need to be. There could be certain type of experiences that you just cannot have just with the brain alone. Here's one example. Dream imagery is really weird and unstable. But you do have an experience of stability of your external world, right? You can look at this can of Red Bull, you can look away, you can look back to it. It's a very stable type of experience. Nothing changes a lot. For this type of experience, maybe you need an external world that pushes your brain into having stable type of experiences. If your brain is left by itself, you will never have an experience of stability. It will be chaotic and bizarre and incongruous as dream imagery is. Just saying that this doesn't need to be very worrisome for a physicalist or a naturalist. So we had projection, where everything's possible, injection, and then there's surjection. In surjection, what you have is, wait, let me take this away. This too. So in surjection, what you're having is that everything in the codomain is mapped onto by at least one thing in the domain, but it can be mapped by several things. So what you have here would be something, for example, like this. Two things, and this can only be brought by one. So this would be a way in which you can, for example, account for redundancy or multiple realizability or whatever you want to bring about certain type of phenomenal states. If you're really strict in your idea of what kind of metaphysics you would like, you could call for bijection. And it's just everything in the codomain is mapped. Wait, there's a red one. I'm going to grab a red color. That's cool. Everything in the codomain is mapped onto by one thing, and everything in the domain maps onto just one thing. And then you have something like this. Let's put this back in. So it's just straight lines, right? One thing in the codomain maps onto one thing, and only one thing in the codomain is mapped onto by the domain. If you're an identity theorist and you reject multiple realizability, you're going for bijection. But the interesting thing with Chalmers is that he gives, by just using this kind of very unconstrained word mapping, he gives you a lot of leeway of combining your theories, right? So he doesn't tell you whether the mapping should be a projection, injection, surjection, or bijection. He just tells you that, well, there must be some kind of mapping. And by saying that one is just sufficient, he just tells you, well, the neural stuff is the domain. The other is the codomain. Because if you know that I'm in that kind of neural state, you know what I'm experiencing. And you immediately get this kind of idea where you could use a neural correlate to know whether Tomáš is conscious now or not. And that's fine. Now here's one thing why, now I'm going to my definition, why I think that this is problematic. It can account for redundancy. It can account for metaphysical promiscuity. But it doesn't give you an exclusion criterion. For an exclusion criterion, sufficiency is not enough, right? Because if a sufficient condition is lacking, what it is sufficient for can still be there, right? So we could vote on whether we want to have knödel or pizza tonight, right? And one sufficient condition to do this is having people raise their hand. But people don't really have to raise their hand to vote, right? If nobody raises their hand, we could still have a vote by, for example, writing stuff down. So just because one sufficient condition for having a vote is not fulfilled doesn't mean that we didn't have a vote, right? There are different ways of doing votes. So what Chalmers doesn't give you is any way of excluding any kind of animal of being capable to be conscious. Just because one sufficient condition is lacking, one neural state is lacking, by the logic of how he sets it up, you are not allowed to infer that if that neural correlate is lacking, then this animal is unconscious. It's just the logic of the thing. If you would do this, you would do a logical fallacy, namely negating the antecedent. And I think because we want to have these kind of exclusion criteria, we should want to have something more than just sufficiency. And I think this is also my criticism to your kind of idea, that you're stressing this kind of sufficiency condition. And you want to have this kind of necessity conditions to be able to exclude certain entities from being conscious. I also think that this sufficiency condition doesn't really give you intertheoretical competition. I'm going to demonstrate this shortly, just with an example beforehand. Very classical example, the Eddington experiment. So we had in the history of physics some very, very nice theories about the nature of light, right? And about how light behaves around bodies. So we had Huygens, who said that light is not corpuscular, therefore it shouldn't be affected by gravity or mass at all. We had Newton, who think it was corpuscular, but he didn't really think that it was strongly affected by gravity. It was a little bit affected, but not very strongly. Then we had Einstein, who said, well, you know, gravity is just not something that just exerts force on bodies. It's really something that curves space itself. So in a curved space, it shouldn't just be, a corpuscle like light shouldn't just be affected by the strength of the body, but it should also follow that curve of that curved space. And that leads to different types of predictions about how light behaves if, for example, it passes by a heavy body like the sun. So here's the sun, here are we, here are some stars, right? So the stars, just that it barely passes that strong stellar body, right? So if that body's not there, 6 months before, we would have a nice photo where, for example, certain stars would be. Now the sun is there, and now the moon is here who blocks out the light of the sun. So we can see these stars. According to Huygens, we should see that star being exactly where it is because light is not affected by strong bodies and space is not curved. According to Newton, it should be affected a little bit, right? So it should look like as if, so this is where it would behave. So it should look a little bit curved outward. So Newton would put it here, Einstein would put it here because it's even stronger affected. So this is how you would test this. These theories make different type of predictions about the same section of the world, and by making this kind of nice experimentum crucis, we can find out which one we should believe more. And I think this happens sometimes in hypotheses about neural correlates as well. I'm going to end shortly, so this is my last point. But very few experiments are set up in this way. So the neuroscience of consciousness is, in my view, has a big problem because it's theory poor. There are a lot of theories are out there, but they're not really pitted against each other, right? So there's no real dogfights going on with, you know, where we have two hypotheses and we test which one's wrong, right? It's very often just data-driven. And then this data is accounted for by one theory, but another theory can account for it again. But we're not really setting up very often experiments where we try to see which of these kind of competing theories are wrong. But we could. So I'm talking here about, I did a comparison between two theories, the recursive processing theory by Victor Lamy, which says that a being is conscious if there is some kind of recursive processing going on in that neural system. The other theory that I'm comparing here is the integrated information theory, which says that the amount of integrated information in a system must be higher than 0, then that thing is conscious. And that's like conscious of anything, just at all conscious, has any type of phenomenal experience, right? Not specified what it is. So these theories are about the same section of the world. Which things in the world have any type of consciousness, right? But they ascribe consciousness differently. This system, for example, has no recursive processing going at all, but it has a phi value, the value for integrated information, higher than 0. So the integrated information theory should say this thing is conscious. The recursive processing theory should say this thing is not conscious. Here, we could say that the recursive processing theory, this happens. There is some kind of recursive processing going on here. That's one way to go. The others going, all these kind of things are symmetric kind of connectors. But the phi value, according to the 2008 theory of the integrated information theory, is 0. So recursive processing theory should say this thing is conscious. Integrated information theory should say this is not conscious. Here, well, it's getting really weird. So according to the integrated information theory, a 0 carries just as much information as a 1 does, right? It doesn't carry the same information, but the same amount. So an inactive brain would be conscious, That's what the IIT is claiming. But clearly, in an inactive brain, there's no recursive processing going on, right? So this would be a third case where these two theories differ. Recursive processing theory says an inactive brain is not conscious, but the 2008 version of the IIT, integrated information theory, would say, well, it could be conscious. Now here's the problem. So we have these two theories out there in the field that look as if we could make this nice kind of experimental crucis. They're about the same section of the world. They make different types of predictions. We should, if we had a good indicator for when things are conscious, right, independent of their neural activation, then, well, let's test these things, right? Let's see which of these things are conscious, and then we can like throw one of them away and just focus on the one that's really been good. But we can't, for principled reasons, because these are NCC hypotheses. Recursive processing is just a sufficient condition for being conscious. And integrated information theory is another sufficient condition for being conscious. So if we think that any kind of neural correlate is just sufficient, well, then that's conscious according to recursive processing. This is conscious according to IAH, integrated information theory. This is conscious according to the IIT, the integrated information theory. So we, for principal reasons, don't get this kind of nice intertheoretic competition that we want if we say that the neural stuff is only sufficient for consciousness. So I think there should be one way in which we could say that the neural correlates, some neural way in which the neural stuff is necessary. And this is tricky because we don't want it to be necessary in order to account for redundancy and plasticity. But we do want it to be necessary to account for, well, for things like exclusion criteria and intertheoretic competition. So how do we get this? How do we get this kind of nice balance between things that are conscious, where the neural stuff is just sufficient for it, but also where we have some kind of necessity for it? And I think this is the reason why we have to distinguish between tokens and types. The tokens, the things that actually are the thing that at a certain moment in time bring about a conscious experience, they are sufficient. Because I know that if I lesion that part of your brain now, a few months later, another neural token could bring about the same type of experience. A token of the same type of experience. So on the level of tokens, each token is just sufficient. But then there should be some kind of way in which a neural type is necessary for bringing about something of that phenomenal type. And I think this is how we should think about this. So we have data that these kind of neural states, N1, N2, N3, N4, and 5, this is the data we have. We know that each of them corresponded to some kind of phenomenal states, P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. These are tokens, right? So we know that N1 brought about this phenomenal experience, this. But now we want, this is our data. So we want to know, how can we make this kind of nice type? And that's where the feature bundle stuff comes in. So unfortunately, just by looking at our data, we don't really know how we should type these things correctly. They have a lot of stuff in common, right? All of them, for example, are probably activations in a human brain. But does being human, being part of a human brain, should that be part of being necessary for consciousness? Probably not. So there will be some type of features that they share that are probably not necessary to bring about a conscious experience, and others that will be. So NC theories should then work in that way that they make predictions. They should say that, okay, you know what? They all share this type of feature, So F1, F2, F3, these kind of features. And here's another state that we can bring about. If we find such a state that shares this feature, there should be some kind of phenomenal experience. This is my prediction. For example, this is recursive processing in the back of the head, and I don't know, gamma scale oscillation. It's called like this, right? And I'm saying, wait. I think that gamma scale oscillation is interesting. And I think that was the first, I don't know. Anyway, so let's say I think that F1 and F2 are interesting, but not F3. So I say, here's another state. It shares F1 and F2, but has another feature. For example, it computes a certain type of function, right? And this is totally different from this F3. And I think that should bring about this kind of phenomenal experience. And now I can, if I can manipulate your brain in a nice way, I can see which one brings about an experience and which one doesn't. And this is, I think, the way in which, on the level, we think that there might be some type, some feature bundle that all single neural tokens that bring about experiences share. So having these features is necessary for something to be a neural correlate of consciousness. But each of these individual tokens is just sufficient. Any other of these tokens that shares these kind of features would be sufficient as well. And I think this, if we think about this way, I actually still think that my definition is the only one that fulfills all these four adequacy conditions. And I know what you're getting at, but I still think that you should strongly think about the necessity thing, and it's not too strong. It's something that I think we want from a neuroscience of consciousness. And so this is where I'll stop. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happily looking forward to the discussion.
I don't see what's the plan.
I'm sorry, I said I'm going to talk about
go through comment on the and then discuss.
And again, I was over time. I'm really sorry.
No, I think it was very clear. So, I can start. We had this kind of informal division of labor agreement that I will mostly comment on the necessity, sufficiency, and related stuff, and Michal will talk about typing more, although it's related. So, but I will try to stick to the necessary or sufficient conditions. I should also say that methodologically that we wrote the paper together, but as you well know, co-writing a paper is always an exercise in compromise. So we do not share all views on this topic, and the paper is a kind of compromise. So, but we might also debate some points between ourselves. That's really normal with co-written papers.
Yes.
And another thing is that so we called our definition MCC 2.1.
Right.
But I think that maybe even that was a little bit too presumptuous, because what we did was basically we just grabbed your definition and tinkered with it a little bit. So,
right.
So we are drawing on your work quite a bit, and so this is really. I don't think we are going to disagree very much. And I think that you also brought up nicely that our papers have a different emphasis,
yeah.
right? So you are doing great work in actually working out the nuts and bolts of the concept of neural correlation. whereas we mostly adopt it from you and we plug it into these metaphysical debates. That's one big aim of the paper. And the other paper was to say that the notion of a type should be much more elaborated. That's what we talk about.
Yeah.
And I think these differences in emphasis are also manifest in how well these definitions cope with these 4 points. That is something you also bring out quite helpfully. I mean, the exclusion criteria, redundancy, inter-theoretic competition, and metaphysical promiscuity. So, yeah, you're right that so we are stressing the metaphysical components much more than you. And as you said, we are doing quite well on the metaphysical promiscuity. So we are defending a kind of identity theory, but we are leaving the door open for other types of these vertical relations, right? But we advocate a lot the theory of identity, and we try to bring out the advantages of adopting theory of identity. So that is really, I think, the main reason, the metaphysical openness, why we reverted to Chalmers's notion of sufficient conditions. Right. Because it still seems to me that I now completely understand your reasoning why you are including the necessity clause, but there might be drawbacks that this move opens, and one is that you are closing some metaphysical options. Namely, you are closing multiple realizability, right? In the, let's say, in the neural domain. You say that all neural correlates of consciousness necessarily have a certain form. And I think that this presupposes a law-like uniformity in the nature. Right? You say that you can extrapolate to every kind of future being with a neural equipment, and you would say, okay, so if this creature is going to be conscious, then necessarily it has to display some of these feature bundles that we isolated in research. And that's a reasonable step, and we also expect that nature, that the way consciousness is generated is covered by something that that approaches a natural law. But on the other hand, it's a wild hypothesis, but you might be confronted with a case when a creature with neural architecture is realizing conscious experience, for example, pain, in a way that would not correspond to your feature bundle. It's improbable, but possible. So I agree that logically our definition is weaker on the inter-theoretic competition and exclusion criteria, maybe, but it's more safe metaphysically, but also maybe ethically, because I think you would be committed to rule out conscious experiences in creatures that would be equipped with neural structures, but possibly realize consciousness and, I mean, the ethically important states such as pain in a different way, and they would be screened out by your necessity requirement, and that could be a problem. So I think that stressing sufficiency is ethically also more safe, because it's enough if you show me. So I can definitely rely on the positive presence of consciousness in creatures that display these sufficient conditions for being conscious. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what our definition allows me. And I agree that I cannot exclude, as you said, as a logical, for logical reasons, we couldn't exclude cases when other sufficient mechanism would be in play. But I would say that from a certain point of view, that's a virtue and not a drawback of theory. Right? So ethically and metaphysically, I would use this defense of our definition. The metaphysical, at least the sketch of this metaphysical argument, is already contained in the paper. The ethical things is something that was not in there, but I get that. And also, I think that you mentioned that you are a closet identity theorist. Yeah. I think you are actually more, because necessity requirements are typical of identity theories, right? And there are even some people like Tom Polgar, for example, who's written amazing stuff on theories of identity, and he makes it a condition of being a true identity theorist. So he says you have to have the balls to say that you accept the necessity requirements. I don't think he is right, but he has a very able defense of this claim. So maybe we are even weaker theorists of identity than you are in the end. So I would be interested as a side issue in what's your metaphysical take on the neural correlation debate, because as I said, you spend much more time on working out the technicalities that are very much needed in NCC debates. And well, maybe last point, and that will bridge to Michal's agenda. When I was revisiting your paper, I realized that I think we both didn't quite understand the idea of these feature bundles in your work.
Yeah, because, I didn't do good work there.
Yeah, that's correct. Because for one thing, we were pretty absorbed in this agenda of working out a typology of mental states and corresponding neuronal states, that from the start we were working with a much more fine-grained and more piecemeal notion of a neural type than you are. And therefore the criticism that we make in the papers in this against your theories is misguided. But it wasn't just this. I mean, if you read again the definitions of Crick and Chalmers and these people setting up not just the notion, but in Crick's case, the whole research agenda, it's pretty natural to read the neural type as something very specific, something that lights up when you are seeing a rat. And we are just continuing in this tradition. And we were not really appreciating that your feature bundles are more general. So if I understand it, you would say that in your definition, from the neural point of view, there is just one common neural type, right? To all conscious experiences. Would it be correct? Whereas we have much more piecemeal bijective mappings between mental types and neural types. So the mechanisms that we talk about are mechanisms of particular phenomenal types, right?
Mm-hmm. Would you allow me to answer to this? Because I have like 6 points that I made out from your reply. I'll try to make it short so we can have more discussion. So the first, I'll start with just paraphrasing, and you tell me whether I got that right. So the first was where you're saying, well, you're really having the strong kind of notion that you want to have law-like dependencies, right? And I think this is a worry because, so I also studied biology, and you very rarely have any kind of laws in biology. You very rarely have any kind of laws in the humanities or any kind of things that might be considered being a science. So maybe it's just pig-headedness to think that there should be something like a law-like stuff that binds conscious stuff to neural stuff. That might be wrong, but I think as something to strive for, I think this is maybe something that you don't want to give up too early. So I think, yeah, we're getting all this kind of very messy data that shows us that all kind of very different systems might be able to bring about the same kind of experience. But I mean, there is this question: why do they do that? Why does that work? What does that brain of that half of a brain have still enough in common with that full brain to still bring about an experience of the left side, for example? So I cannot show that there is a law-like dependency, but I think that just as a research heuristics, as a goal that we still want to keep keep with us when we're doing research and we're setting up theories, I think it's good to have that. So I can't really defend it, and I think it would be probably an empirical point that after a while, if we don't really find any theory that sticks, I still think we should look for a law. It could be a very, very complicated law, but I think we should still look for it. In between, we will have a lot of kind of nice parts, but I think just as a goal, as a general research goal, I think it would be still good to have. So this would be my answer to this. But that was the easy part. You had 3 points that I can't really capture multiple realizability, that I can't, that I'm not ethically humble, let's call it like this, that I'm really, really doing a dangerous game in an ethical realm. And then I might be really too strict of an identity theorist. And I want to take these off. You had a similar point with the improbable but possible weird kind of instantiations in neural systems. So I'm going to talk to these 4 points together. I do think that I can capture multiple realizability. Because I think that multiple realizability is sometimes misunderstood as a counter towards identity theory. The reason I think is, what are the things that the classical examples that you have? Okay, I can feel pain, an octopus can feel pain. My brain is not at all like an octopus's brain. Therefore, there's no neural type that these two could share. And I think, well, yeah, I mean, if you type by anatomical features, there's nothing that we share, right? But you also mentioned these kind of Kostic ideas about topological features, and I mean, there might be very abstract ways of typing neural types, where still my brain and an octopus's brain could instantiate the same type. And so this is what I mean. These features that I'm talking about that type together doesn't have to be anatomical features. They could be topological features. They could be maybe even just informational features. We don't really know. We should try everything that we have at our disposal to type neural stuff and then see what sticks. But I think that the octopus pain doesn't really faze me that much, because I think if we're thinking more about, as you're doing, about how can we type these neural activations, I think that still leaves a door for what might look with one eye closed as multiple realizability. With both eyes open, we could still have the same kind of neural type. So this, I think, speaks to the multiple realizability and the improbable but possible different instantiation. I always wonder, I mean, improbable in what way and possible in what way, right? I mean, there's naturally possible, metaphysically possible. I think we're both playing the same game in the naturally possible stuff, right? Yeah. Let's talk about the ethical problem. I'm totally aware of this. So I also work on pain, and one of the big things is fish pain, right? Can we know whether fish feel pain or not? If you're a pescatarian and you're leaning towards vegetarian, then that's something that worries you. There you go. We're two of the same kind. But then again, if you look at the discussion, the main argument that fish can't feel pain is by anatomical features. So there's this big argument that fish can't feel pain because they lack a cortex. Same argument for birds. They lack a cortex, right? With us, it's a cortical feature, but fish don't have a cortex. Birds have a telencephalon. They don't have a cortex. Therefore, they can't feel pain. But I think that's too quick, because they type by anatomical features. And anatomical features might not be the right way of typing the neural stuff. So I would say that I'm still thinking that we can do this, but I think there's an epistemic risk, as is usually the case when we're talking ethically. We don't have all information. So we have to go with the best theory that we have. It's the same thing with anesthesia, right? We don't really have a good indicator for whether you are actually unconscious when we cut you up in a surgery theater, right? I mean, I'm just saying there's all these kind of weird cases about anesthetic awareness and anyway, so I think there's just, but I would say that this is an epistemic risk. And it depends on how risk averse or how risk affine you are. I'm rather risk averse. So I would say better err on the side of caution. Better think that, for example, fishes can feel pain and not do something wrong to them. But because I'm not so convinced that we have the right theory of consciousness yet. But there could be cases where we're going really, really forward and we're looking at, for example, B neurosystems. And they might be unconscious according to every kind of candidate we have on the table. Probably aren't, but could be. And then we could say, well, this might be something where we, according to all theories that are able, our epistemic risk is very minimal. And therefore, we can say, for example, enjoy your warm bees. Dig in. So this is about the epistemic risk. On the identity theory thing, yeah. I think if you're an identity theorist, you should go with necessity. But I'm talking mainly about natural necessity. And natural necessity is not such a strong thing to ask. Even, I mean, Chalmers in The Conscious Mind, he would say, yeah, natural necessity of neural activation with consciousness, I'll give you that. The real metaphysical game is not in natural necessity, it's a metaphysical necessity, right? So are these zombies metaphysically possible, not naturally possible, right? And so I would say, yeah, I mean, every kind of identity theorist should go with natural necessity and accept that that's the case. But also, a lot of non-identity theorists would accept that. Just multiple realizability people wouldn't, but epiphenomenalists, certain types of dualists would accept natural necessity as being something. So I'm not too fazed by that critique. So I'm waiting for the quick feature bundle thing until Michael has made his point. If you want to ask back, please do. Interrupt me. Also, if other people have clarificatory questions, you know, it doesn't have to be a dialogue.
Yeah, I think, again, just a small point to what you said so far. We're talking about the role of cortex for different kinds of experiences with Dr. Ježek yesterday. And he told me that they don't see the, you know, when you consider the case of the mice or the stuff that they use in their experimental designs, setup. So they don't even expect them to have the cortex or the role the cortex plays in their behavior, because they are so much focused on, or basically focused only on what is happening in the hippocampus. So all the knowledge, all the interpretation of the experiment, how the rat behave in the labyrinth or in the room where they change the colors. You were probably also talking about that before. So the explanation of why they behave, how they behave, is just based on the neuroscientific knowledge or the neurophysiological pattern of the just within the hippocampus. And he also argued in a way that this is, and it seems to be very logical for me, at least that from the evolutionary point of view, this was the first or the oldest part of the brain. I don't know now if it was paleocortex or brachial cortex or some parts of it. So, which I must say quite surprised me that it seems to me that he doesn't even suppose that the rats have any kind of consciousness at all, and they don't need to put it on the table as a hypothesis as well, because they think that they can explain the rat's behavior just by explaining some correlating, say, behavior on the other hand and neurophysiological patterns changing slightly if you change the room, if you change the color in your room, and slightly differs the patterns, but there's very much similar in it. So it would probably not be multiple realizability, but some kind of, but there would be something in common probably. It would may play a positive role for your argument that there must be something that with both these experiences, which are not so totally different, but they are quite different in some aspect, but they share something.
Okay.
Without having any need to talk about consciousness.
I mean, I mean, that's also what I like about these kind of recursive processing and integrated information theories, because it's a way of describing the neural correlate of just generally being conscious in a way that is independent of a specific type of anatomy, a specific type of physiological way of implementing recursive processing, even as independent of a specific type of whether it's wetware or hardware, right? So it's a way in which neural correlate, I think what the picture I want to draw is that NCC research could be a way, if we get the right way of typing these kind of neural states, that could inform, for example, work in artificial theories of consciousness.
Sorry, I don't want to hijack the debate, and very soon we should also give word to others. So this is really the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
So let me go back to this. So we like the debate between sufficient or necessary conditions is important, but I do not think that this is the real difference between us, because as we say, we are ready to tighten up the definition with adding the necessity requirement if we see good reason. And your reasons might be pretty good. But the real disagreement between how to frame a definition, let's say, of NCC is how broadly we should type the neural happenings. And here I must say I'm not really convinced by your broad approach to neural type, because it doesn't seem right to gloss over the differences that are manifested at the phenomenal level. So I really think that we should type, as we try to do in the paper, we should type the neural domain in a much more piecemeal manner, and the definition of NCC should reflect it. So your definition is glossing over the differences between various colors and various sensory modalities at the neural level, right? At the phenomenal level, you are working with the standard typology of colors and sounds and so on. And I feel like something is lost if you type a neural correlate so broadly, so that you say that in the end you have just one type of neural activity serving you as your NCC. I think that we should really type it much more in a much more piecemeal manner, reflecting these phenomenal differences. Because if we don't respect phenomenal differences at the neural level, then why not say that every conscious experience is just one phenomenal type? That's not fair. That's not how it works.
It's not very informative, certainly. Yes, but right?
I completely, or we completely agree that as the ultimate aim of all this is what you are labeling as the feature bubble. So the ultimate aim of consciousness research is really to isolate the mechanism of consciousness as such, that is manifesting in various sensory modalities, in emotions, dreams, and so on. So we agree on this. So it's just about how we should type the neural domain and how fine-grained or coarse-grained it should be. But we also we quite like the neural recurrence theory as a possible candidate for this general consciousness, and we use it quite a bit in our writings, although it would have to be, I mean, it's a very general theory. There are all kinds of neural feedbacks in the brain, and much of it is not conscious, but so it would have to be made more specific, but it seems like a very promising idea.
Yeah, so just let me, because I think that might be a misunderstanding or a very strong reading of what I'm trying to say. So I'm not saying that there's only one phenomenal type, and that's just being conscious. The idea with this is that no matter what your phenomenal type, you can be really fine-grained, the taste of bitter coffee, right? Or it can be really broad-grained, being conscious. Any type of phenomenal, but what I'm saying is, for any type of phenomenal experience, you should expect that there's one neural type, and we want to find out what actually makes any kind of token something of that type. So let's take it like this. The features are the features that a neural thing has to have, but they give their extension are all the tokens of that phenomenal type, right? So so whatever you're thinking should be the phenomenal type. That kind of idea is that you should also think, as a neuroscientist interested in consciousness research, thinking that there's exactly one neural type that matches this phenomenal type. no matter how fine-grained, no matter how big-grained, how coarse-grained you want to have it. So I got the feeling that the difference here is just a very strong reading of what I'm trying to say. But I think really, I'm totally with you. The interesting thing is, how do we type the phenomenal stuff? And how do we type the neural stuff? But we should expect, because I think we should not give up too early on that law-like thing, that there is a one-to-one correspondence between neural types and phenomenal types. It's just not in the way that most people who are arguing against type theory, type identity theory, thought we should type. I mean, that was obviously wrong-headed. But the basic argument for type identity theory is just brilliant. I mean, can I just say, identity theory is such a brilliant theory if you think about it. It's totally counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it not only it gives you a nice, beautifully sparse metaphysics and ontology, but it also explains the kind of puzzles that people are so puzzled with when they're thinking about consciousness, right? The epistemic gap, for example. Why can't we have an explanation of consciousness? Why don't we think that is? Well, because you can't explain identities. They just are, right? So if you're an identity theorist, you're not fazed by the explanatory gap. You just immediately think, yeah, that should be expected if these things are identical. The knowledge argument also. Well, sure, if I know something given to me in one way in which, of the given, doesn't mean that I know about every other way in which this could be given to me, right? So I think the identity theory is just brilliant in even explaining these higher level intuitions that we have about consciousness. Okay, so this was just my general. I'm probably not a closet identity theorist anymore. So, but yeah, so I'm totally with you on that type identity thing. And the interesting, and you're really putting the pressure there where the really, really important stuff is. How do we get to these real good types? But there I would also say we should be open to, we don't really know all the ways in which you could type a neural state, right? And there's a lot of new things going. Before IIT, we had no idea that you could use these kind of weird complexity measures to maybe type neural states. We should be open to this kind of scientific process. And that's why I try to be so abstract and so, as you say, open. I want to be open to this kind of progress that I have no idea what's going to happen.
I would also have a lot to say, but
oh yeah.
If anyone else, if anyone would like to ask Sascha or ask about something that you have heard so far, of course we can keep the discussion working. Because it's exciting.
It really is exciting. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking more to you. I shouldn't have talked to so much. I want to talk more with you. Okay.
I need explanation of the relationship between the neural mechanism and your definition and the feature bundle in your definition. For example, in the scheme
right.
where the neural mechanism works.
Yeah, maybe I can try to explain and
sure.
clarify maybe a bit the difference. So it's still, I'm still not sure where the difference is exactly, but we use this concept of this notion of neural mechanism as something in the brain that accounts for two things. You are conscious, and you are conscious in a specific way. So you are conscious of a blue color, or you are conscious of a high-pitched sound. So there's consciousness, and there is the content of your state. And these two things are packed into one package in our term neural mechanism. Whereas I think that Sascha is really stressing only the thing that makes you conscious. And the mechanism that you will find also in other conscious states. So no matter, let's put it like this, no matter what you are consciously experiencing, you will always find, that's the presumption, you will always find this common brain process going on. For example, there will be the same type of neural recurrence going on. So whether I'm tasting water or looking at sun, there will be something in common. And we agree that this is going on, but we are packing into this neural mechanism also the content stuff. So that's why I'm using this term that we have a more piecemeal notion of neural type. So we are saying that if I'm looking at my computer, then the neural mechanism is somewhat different than when I'm looking at you or the orange in the water and so on. So these are the changes in the content of this conscious state, and they have to be accounted for neurally, right, if you are materialist, and we all are. But there is also something that is presumably common, another neural mechanism, right, that is running through all these states and is making you conscious of these different things. And that, I think that has the feature bundle in your...
Yeah, I think so too. So I can maybe talk why I didn't use the term mechanism. A common understanding of a mechanism is that if you're giving us a mechanism, you're describing parts and whatever they're doing in the whole mechanism, right? If I tell you what a clock does, I'll tell you about all the gears and the kind of connections and how this one turns this one and all these kind of things. And when I wrote this thing, slowly the integrated information theory was coming up. And I had the feeling that this type of really abstract description, where it's just about a very abstract feature, namely the level of phi, the level of integrated information, that can be the same across really different mechanisms. I thought maybe I shouldn't presuppose that a good theory of consciousness would be one that talks about parts and how they're interacting. And this is why I shied away from mechanism. And I just used feature bundle. But obviously I'm thinking that you should type by those features that a neuroscientist would type things by, right? So very often there will be neural features. But I also think that we should be open to interdisciplinary interactions, for example, between a neuroscientist and, let's say, a mathematician or a computer scientist who takes these kind of neural ideas but tries to formulate them in a more abstract way. For example, we talked about topology already, right? But also information flow seems to be something that is not necessarily a neural feature. And so I just talked about features. Because I thought it might be interesting for these kind of interdisciplinary people to type neural stuff by features that are not necessarily neural.
Quick rejoinder, I think this is a very good question. Feature bundle for me was the main obstacle in your paper. I was really struggling a lot with the notion. Right. I literally, I was blank on what it means. Until I read and reread passages again. So maybe in the future you could spend more time developing this notion because it's really a bit untractable.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I always thought that this is a problematic thing, but I try to avoid preconceived notions about how to group things. And yeah, thanks. I hope it makes more sense if I explain it. By the way, did we answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good.
maybe a short comment on a couple of more things about the feature bundle, because I'm still quite confused about it. Or is it, because it seems to me how we got to questioning what feature bundle really is like. I think was our view on the issue, on our dual view, dual model, because it's very clearly in there. If you use for interpreting your feature bundle, you can very clearly see the question whether which we asked during our reading, whether feature bundle is something that explains how the phenomenal character or the content, if you may say, becomes conscious. It brings it into consciousness, like the theories like AI theory. You can use different, but recurrent processing was the preferred variant.
Yes.
Or whether this is a feature bundle, something that connects the phenomenal character of kind of different experiences, which are anyway, two different red experiences, which may differ in light of the color or was. Yeah. But still, there is something in common. And then before you answer,
because you were talking about colors.
Yeah, and the question is, what will happen? What would happen? And I think you should also consider what is happening when you go from the less general types to the more general types. If there is some kind of change it cannot happen some kind of change in interpreting the feature bundle. I mean that in the cases of less general type, that the feature bundle seems to be more like the feature of phenomenal character. But as you go higher in the hierarchy, it seemed to me by the reading that I had more stronger tendency to interpret it as the general mechanism for pushing the phenomenal character into consciousness.
Yes, because ultimately all possible conscious states share only this mechanism of consciousness. Common.
Right.
So that's the most general type, if you want.
All right.
We are working maybe on this.
Right. So I'm not sure whether I fully got this. So I mean, obviously, I would say that all types of being conscious would share some feature bundle, but probably just having, for example, a color experience would have that type of feature bundle plus other features added to it in order to make it a color experience.
That's what we call mechanism.
Right. So then we're just, I think, using more or less just different terms. Because, I would agree that's a way we should think about it. That, the higher we go up in these kind of typing hierarchies, as you stress, right? The less specific the features will be. But the more specific you get in your phenomenal types, trying to look what is the neural correlate to it, the more of these features will probably be added on to make it this specifically the neural correlate for sandalwood smell.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great idea. But it still would be the feature bundle would be the description of phenomenal character.
Well, the feature. No. The feature bundle in the features that you use to characterize the neural type, there should be not a single phenomenal feature in there, right? Because then it should be just a posteriori that this feature brings about an experience. Because if you're typing on the left-hand side by phenomenal features, I mean, this is something that you want to find the law-like connection to. So if you like pre-put phenomenal features into these feature bundles, you wouldn't really get the nice kind of predictions that I'm thinking you should get, right? Because then you're just thinking, okay, so any type of neural state that has these neural features plus also correlates with a certain type of phenomenal experience, that's not something how you want to set up your experiments. So here should only be non-phenomenal features. No single phenomenal feature should be in this feature bundle. That's how I think about it. I mean, you could do it, but I think you wouldn't get nice experiments out of it.
I think we are getting into very technical details, and we are having a lot of fun, but I'm not sure that...
Yeah. If you want to ask a question in any other language, I'm sure that we will have enough people here who could translate or make it plausible. Don't let I think, language hinder you in asking to. My Chinese is really, really bad. I'm sorry.
I will try.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Sascha, for your lecture. And yesterday, I was really impressed by the clarity and persuasiveness of your presentation. And I'm far from being kind of expert in neuroscience or philosophy of mind, but it seemed to me that it's quite difficult to find some weak point in your argumentation. So I have just a few general comments.
Yes.
Well, I was slightly lost in this example from physics.
Right.
It was just my fault because I didn't pay attention properly. But, well, I would say generally that I would take for granted that everything or all we can explain it or predict it in classical mechanics. We can do it easily in relativistic physics too. And I really like your coin or this term metaphysical promiscuity. And I must say it reminds me, this combines ontological relativity. And well, I should admit that I don't have nothing against promiscuity in general, but you should extend it in time. So now you can get, so this promiscuity simply becomes kind of monogamy, let's say temporal monogamy. And in that case, you can simply, let's say, try to use kind of these ontological commitments as Quine does. And it seems to me proper to do it, especially in science, because then you would expect from language that it would be monogamous. So I believe that it would be so boring, and language is far from being stable or monogamous or fixed somehow, because in that case it would be dead language. So, well, we try to do it in science. So this is one comment. And it seemed to me interesting your comment or your example, or you just mentioned that we can try to leave brain on its own, in the sense that we can somehow, let's say, disconnect brain from everything else, from external world, and we can try to somehow maybe through our introspection try to grasp what is going on in it during the dream. But it seems to me well, difficult or maybe hard to realize this, because I cannot imagine that you can simply disconnect brain from your head, and it's always somehow embodied, embedded, and so on, even when we are not, so to speak, conscious. And well, it's enough. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Radek. Those are three very interesting points that you're putting on. So the first, I'm just going to a short comment on the physics example. So I just took this because it's the standard example for an experimentum crucis, right? So just something where you can, I mean, Popper just rides this horse to death, right? Because he says, well, this is the way to falsify a theory, right? And so I just stole this, and I thought, yeah, maybe if this is an experimental crucis, maybe we want to have something like this, at least for it to be possible, right? That Popperians can do neuroscience of consciousness as well. So this is just a standard thing, and I didn't really explain it that well, but I just want to make sure that this is where I'm coming from with this example. Now, the cool thing about monogamy is, like you're mentioning, yeah, I totally get it. You may want to have these kind of over time things, and also talk about ontological commitments. The nice thing is that, you know, monogamy does not need to be symmetrical, right? So you can be monogamous, but doesn't mean that your partner has to. That happens quite some time. The same can be. You can have a very strong view on what the right metaphysics for mind should be, right? But NCC theory could be open to a lot of those very monogamous people, right? I think that's a way of why I wanted to set it up. And I also like it that you're talking about ontological commitments, because ontological commitments can come from a lot of different places, right? We might have, for example, non-empirical reasons to prefer identity theory or functionalism or all these kind of things. But still, we want probably to engage in that type of theory. And it could be that, you know, over time, there might be certain fashions, right? I mean, we always had this, right? Certain type of metaphysics become more fashionable for a while because we had this really nice argument, right? And then we realize, oh, it's actually a bad argument, so the fashion changes a little bit, and so you go for another way, right? You try to make other metaphysical or ontological commitments. But I think it's a benefit if the neuroscience can still do their work, and none of the work we have to throw away because we as philosophers have non-empirical reasons to shift our ontological commitments. So I think saying that, you know, these kind of, you know, monogamy over time or so is a really nice way of thinking about this. So thanks, I like that idea. I think that's really good. Also having this kind of ontological relativity, at least to some degree, I think I'm up for that. That's why I also try to set up this NCC 2.0 in a way that is compatible, for example, with dualism. And it is, because I'm already talking about natural necessity, and no dualist I know would actually go against natural necessity. The third thing about the brain on its own, yeah. So I know that embodiment is really, really strong. You cannot ignore embodiment. That's true. I must say, for cognition, I very often find embodiment and all the other E accounts very helpful. And I think they really have something to say there. For consciousness, I'm not convinced for most conscious states. The only state where I think actually, yes, you need more than the brain is the experience of stability. That's the case that I think, okay, I'm biting the bullet there. For the experience of stability, you probably need something external that pushes your brain into these very stable states. But, I mean, you can dream colors, right? You can have all kind of visual experiences. You maybe have them in a little bit of different way, but you have all these kind of experiences independent of how your body moves. You have a dream body that walks around. Doesn't mean that your sleep body has to walk around. It gets even weirder if we're talking about psychedelic experiences, where people take drugs and have all types of weird, interesting experiences that are, even though the situation, the body that they're having, is still the same. It's merely talking about how a specific receptor in the brain is activated. So I'm working with a neuropharmacologist who works with LSD, and she has this really cool research that's coming out now, where she blocks just one receptor, the 5-HT2A receptor, and if you block this and you give somebody LSD, there will be no psychedelic effects. So it's one single receptor that this thing that if LSD triggers it, then you have all these really interesting effects on the body, on your consciousness. But so I'm not really I'm not really convinced for embodiment for consciousness. Yes, so I'm sticking with there. I've got lots more to say there because it's been a shtick of mine. because, yeah, anyway, but we can talk later more about, but I think really for consciousness, embodiment is not a thing.
You can block the effect of LSD by blocking
by catanzerin. Yeah, catanzerin is a 5-HT2A receptor blocker. And Katrin...
the LSD story.
Well, it's really interesting to think what's happening there. But it might be also a way to like shorten bad trips. Right. So that's what they're looking into.
Right. So
anyway.
Maybe the government should put this stuff in water and block psychedelic experiments of population. Maybe.
Yeah.
And this research was implemented in Magdeburg?
No, in Zurich. So it's Katrin Preller. She's from the Vollenweider lab at Berkeley. They're doing a lot of LSD experiments. So, but she's the one who does the catanzerin studies with this kind of 5-HT2A blocking.
I must say that I'm totally in agreement with you as concerns the 4A, this stuff.
Yeah.
And for years, I think very same way about it's totally out. I think you can explain, but you don't need it for having consciousness and for this stuff. No.
Yeah.
If you suppose that anything that happens to you must be somehow, processed in the neural system.
Yeah.
I don't think then you need to take care about what's happening outside or on your body, because everything is, the neural stuff does everything. It doesn't matter. This is might be the part of the explanation, but I think it's not necessary nor sufficient.
For consciousness. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I would say, like, for cognition, it's really interesting. I mean, walking behavior is really, really strongly developed by the body. And there's a lot of, like, problem-solving tasks where it just, like, embodiment, it's really hard to explain. I mean, it's such a good tool for explanation. But in consciousness, yeah, I'm totally with you.
It's quite relevant to the metaphysics of consciousness, because people often use embodiment as an argument against theory of identity. And they say, no, you have to take the environment and your body into account when you are typing or explaining phenomenal conscious states. But I have to be here on the same boat. I'm totally brain-centric. And it's not just my predilection. There are so many arguments. And the best of them are summarized in Ken Aizawa's great paper, Don't Give Up on the Brain, where he goes case by case. It's such a nice demolition of embodiment. And he demonstrates that you can have all sorts of consciousness just in the brain and without. There are locked-in syndrome cases where there's consciousness and zero embodiment, because people just cannot move at all. And all kinds of pathologies, but also dreams and stuff. Yeah. The brain is enough. Body just sends inputs, right, that are necessary for us to operate.
For me, it was a short paper by Thomas Metzinger. It's called First Order, Second Order, Third Order Embodiment. And he's saying, I mean, he's very specifically, Aizawa is picking these people who come from cognitive science, right? Metzinger is picking these people who come from phenomenology, right? Who are like people who really lead a lot of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. And he's saying, there are these kind of two different things that, there's one way in which you can say, well, cognition really involves your physical body. That's first order embodiment. The second thing is, well, you can say that cognition involves bodily representations, right? For example, that language involves like grasping motions, for example, for concepts, right? Concipable, meaning just grasping something. But then there's a third level saying, well, you do have a felt body, right? But if you're saying that, well, it feels as if, I'm right, my hand is involved in, like my felt hand is involved in writing stuff and solving stuff. That does not say anything about what is the kind of representational feature about it. Doesn't say anything, how is it about with your real body. And so he's blocking this by making this conceptual distinction, saying, well, if you've got one, doesn't mean that you can infer anything about the other stuff. For me, it was that paper where I thought, yeah, that's a good point.
It can be constant hallucination of the body as well.
as we have in dreams, right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of cognition going on with dreams, but yeah. You had a lot of other things you said, but I wanted to open it up to the group, and I'm not sure whether the group's still.
Yeah, also it's 7 p.m. Okay. So any other questions? Pressing issues that you have on your mind? Like some friends of the body?
Well, they already left apparently. The call of the body.
Well, I would have a question to proponent of identity theory about the term of identity, but I suppose we can leave it for discussion in the restaurant.
So if I may, one small point to
final
point,
yes,
which concerns them, might be useful, maybe not, I'm not sure. But I call it, the question was the answer, why there are no NCC for computers?
Yeah.
And the answer is because within all the definitions here,
right,
this doesn't concern any other entities except of those that have brain or quite, structured neural stuff and these things. So, so I think if you would, because you're at the very beginning of your paper, you've tried to argue or try to get through the arguments against necessity condition, and then you put it back to the play, the necessity constraint. And I think that even if you remove the necessity constraint, it still doesn't tell you nothing about this artificial entities like computers and the robots and these things. You would have to change the definition, because the N in the abbreviation of NCC is still the neural, and if they don't have neural stuff in their artificial, the guts and things like this.
But the F is not neural. I think that's the game I'm trying to play. So obviously, I think if we're doing consciousness studies, we should start with entities that are very, very plausibly conscious. You, me, and you, and probably you, and anyway. And so we should start with this. I mean, there's no better way of doing this. Starting with artificial programs, it seems to me just, why? But
it was just about in the future, the definition should be so general that it would include also.
And I think mine is, and here's why. If you read it like this, so a neural correlate of consciousness is such that all neural tokens are minimally sufficient for a token of that type, phenomenal type, and all and only neural tokens, so I'm talking here only about the neural tokens, they share a feature. But I don't say that the feature has to be neural. I'm open to saying that the feature that all neural tokens have in common, and only those, is maybe one that could be an information theoretical feature, or a topological feature, or a structural feature. And it could then be that if we can type all and only neural tokens that have that kind of very abstract feature, these bring about phenomenal experiences. Then, if we can do that, then we might be able to actually implement this in something else. So I think my definition is specifically set up to capture that.
Okay. But anyway, thank you very much for this clarification.
Okay. And can I stress something else, because this came up before, just very shortly. You talked about how we could maybe get from these features to the phenomenal stuff. There might be a way. If we get very broad structural features, there might be an isomorphism between the neural structures and the phenomenal structures. I had a few examples. If we would have time, I would have shown you 3 empirical studies where I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to find abstract neural structures and then say, and this maps onto the phenomenal type. So it's a structural isomorphism that you might get from the neural science. So yeah.
So you can show us.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah, gladly. I mean, cool.
Maybe in the pub.
Oh yeah. So, any other questions? Comments?
So I'm far from tired from philosophy. If you want to talk with me.
Sascha said that he has a special part of his brain which is dedicated to the philosophy, so he can driving a car while talking very seriously about philosophical stuff, which is true, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really never get tired of doing this. So if you still have questions, join us in the pub. I'd be happy to talk to any and each of you. Okay. And thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, and I think we have a lot of in common to do in the future, and
I hope so.
Especially concerning the typing and these things. I
yeah.
think we are very much in